Hi, I'm Josh Carving, and welcome to another Death Battle prediction video. But first, we have Guts versus Dimitri. So one of the big things that I will say going about this episode is that I did mention that if they buy the flood scaling, then it would ultimately be Dimitri who wins. They didn't ultimately bring up the flood for the episode itself, but we do know through the Q&As that were released after that they did buy it. But ultimately it kind of fell by a couple different calculations that they ended up going with. I didn't actually think that they would utilize the Sea God's storm, specifically because of the fact that Guts only defeated the Sea God by stabbing it like in the heart. So I don't know if I would necessarily scale it to the full like output capability that the Sea God is capable of. But ultimately that wouldn't really be relevant compared to the Great Roar's Cloud Dispersion feat that Zod tanks, and Guts has a lot more simplistic scaling to Zod for a higher result, so that's ultimately what I would more rely on. They did in the Q&A specifically say why they didn't use the Great Roar, but I ultimately don't find myself very satisfied with the answer that they gave. One of the big ones that they did was that there were like bystanders that weren't affected, and it was stated to work on the astral plane more than the physical plane. But there are a few issues with that. First of all, there are so many feats in fiction that would absolutely, if someone punched someone with country level attack and like just completely decked somebody, it would probably kill every bystander nearby, and that isn't really something that gets held against most other feats. Off the top of my head, when they calculated the punch that All Might did that like changed the weather, there were people like 20 feet away that are just gawking at it, and they didn't get affected, and yet the feat still goes through. So I don't really think that that's a valid argument against it. It's just that people are gonna generally be nearby, especially because those soldiers were like kilometers down. Like the Shiva Ganeshka was very tall, and I don't think it makes sense to argue against it with that. The other point is that the wave itself was on the astral plane, but the same argument could be made for the apostles themselves. They often come out from the astral plane and otherwise exist there with where the God Hand essentially come from. Or not come from, but hold dominion over. And then the last issue that they say is that it doesn't seem to have physical force, that it could simply be like overtaking the clouds instead of pushing them away, but that's kind of just flagrantly untrue. There is a panel that we see where you can very clearly see motion lines, and you can see like through the area that is being pushed that the clouds are moving. It is pretty straightforward. So I ultimately don't agree that the Great Roar cannot be scaled to Guts in any way. It ultimately doesn't matter so long as they buy the flood scaling, but that one feat would have put Guts over their estimates for the javelins, and would have essentially necessitated them to actually bring up the flood in the episode in order for Dimitri to have a win. So, not a huge fan of that aspect. I do think that the Great Roar was kind of like brushed aside, but it wouldn't have ultimately changed the episode. There were other aspects of the Q&A as well that essentially just dug the grave deeper, where they, for example, were saying that they would probably give emblem scaling, which from Fire Emblem Engage. That's a pretty tricky topic. There is the point to be made where the spirits that are used as the emblems are not the characters themselves, but like embody them. I think a solid argument could be made for or against saying that they are equivalent to their actual characters. I would probably lean against, but I don't know. We'll see that one a lot more when a Fire Emblem matchup comes up, where it is a lot more necessitated, because it does get higher than the flood scaling, and so probably like Edelgard versus Kylo Ren or something. So we'll see when that one happens. But otherwise, the fight was pretty stellar. The only nitpick that I would say is that I could have used a lot more of the fight being Berserker armor versus, like, essentially Berserk Dimitri. I could have used a lot more time with that. For the most part, he just kind of went Berserk. He just kind of jumped in the once. They did, like, a sword clash, and then the end happened, basically. They only had, like, I think, like, maybe 10 seconds, 10, 15 seconds of fighting with the Berserker armor there. So I would have liked a bit more of that, because that was some of the cooler stuff in the fight, too. Other than that, the ending itself is the one thing that a lot of people talk about with this fight. And yeah, it was very good. I like basically him, like, kind of dying on the upper hand. It's a very respectful way to finish off the fight, especially with how Dimitri reacts to it. Yeah, good episode overall. I think, like, objectively, it is probably the best episode of the season, but there are a few personal hang-ups and stuff like that make it so that it's a little bit hard for me to put it on top. But they are mostly personal things more than actual gripes against the episode itself. And yeah, so that brings us to Martian Manhunter versus Silver Surfer. This one's going to be really interesting, just because of the fact that you have a character who is so renowned for his mind control abilities against someone who falls prey to mind control so often. But Silver Surfer, while falling prey to mind control quite often, he also has the power cosmic, which is fucking the closest thing that you could argue is basically the Speed Force in Marvel Comics. And I say that more for the comparison of it can do fucking anything, and it doesn't have to explain shit. Like, there are legit panels where someone's like, wait, how is this happening? The power cosmic. Well, okay, well, what about that part? The power cosmic. And how about us understanding that part? Yep, that's the power cosmic too. So, like, it's legit just this, like, hand-wavy thing where you can basically do fucking anything with it. So I don't have too much to say for this one, just because, again, we're probably going to get the situation where both of them are going to scale to essentially an infinite multiverse. It's going to be one of them fights. So we'll see what ends up happening as far as stats. I don't think they're going to be particularly different, so we'll go in kind of assuming that they're going to be both essentially equal in stats, so it's all going to come down to abilities, which these characters have in spades. I think Silver Surfer ultimately has more methods of winning than Martian Manhunter does. Mostly because he's got all sorts of, like, power nullification and, like, reality warping, existence erasure, all sorts of crazy shit that Martian Manhunter doesn't necessarily have an answer to. So it's a bunch of things that don't come up as often versus the one thing that is essentially his go-to that I don't see any particular reason why he wouldn't do fairly quickly. And it's worth bringing up the funny weakness for Martian Manhunter is that he can sometimes get really, really fucked up by what the person is thinking about. I don't think it's going to come into play here, but I kind of want to see Bueno Excelente get mentioned in the episode itself. That would be a very funny weakness to bring up, because there was essentially someone who was just so perverted and depraved and horrible, crazy thinking that when Martian Manhunter tried to read his mind, he had to, like, flee the planet to get out of range of, like, thinking of, like, what this guy was thinking. So that would be a very funny weakness to bring up. I don't think it's going to come into play against Silver Surfer. Silver Surfer is generally a pretty, I won't say boring, but stoic guy. So I don't think it's going to really matter in that case. As far as who I think will win, it is a little bit more of a toss-up for me, just because of, as I mentioned, one more probable win condition against several that he can just essentially pull out of his bag, but he doesn't as frequently. Partly because Silver Surfer is really a jobber in Marvel in general. Like, holy shit. He spends so much time getting his ass kicked. He's got one of those classic, like, Darkseid versus the muggers, Thanos versus the cops, and then it's Silver Surfer against like the Mexican terrorists or like bandits or something like that, where they just kind of clock him, and it's just one of those funny downplay moments where people funny have this like funny three-way battle between those three people who took down these like cosmic beings. So I'm ultimately probably going to go with Silver Surfer just because of the fact that he does have more options, and power nullification is something that he has used before, and the power cosmic can absolutely do whatever he wants it to do. So yeah, I do think that it's probably going to be Silver Surfer in this case. And yeah, that's all I'll say for this one. But we do have the next one. We already know what it is, and I'm probably not going to do a prediction video for it, just because of the fact that it has been quite wildly. It's a war zone. Like, yeah, I'm just going to be outright. It's a fucking war zone, and I kind of don't want to dip my toe in there in any sort of research capacity. Yeah, we know that it's going to be Discord versus Bill Cipher. So, yeah, I ain't touching that one with a 50-foot pole. Literally in the Discord, the thread had to be locked for a long time because people were just being so toxic and vitriolic towards each other. And I kind of don't want to get in the middle of that one. So with an entirely unresearched and uncaring perspective, I'm going to say Discord wins. That's my prediction. I have nothing to back that up, and nothing that anyone can say will justify it more than me saying, haha, I said that one. So yeah, I'll see you after that one, because I really don't want to touch that one with a 50-foot pole in terms of getting in the actual debate of it. So yeah, I will definitely pass on that. And with that, I will see you then, and everyone have yourselves a great day.